Have you ever wondered why you don't fit in with the people around you? Perhaps you've always felt slightly different or like an outsider looking in. I'm going to explain the reason why. We all have Dharma archetypes. So before I dive into that, let me introduce myself for those of you who don't know me. I'm Nikita, and I simplify your journey by sharing my journey. I blend spirituality with practicality. So let's dive right into the Dharma archetypes. Now, if you've been following me for a while, you might know I talk a lot about karma and Dharma. So just a quick recap. Karma is your conditioning, it's your programming, it's the sense of responsibility, it's your obligation, it's the ties. We often call it karmic ties, and that's because it's the things that keep you in loops and cycles. Dharma, on the other hand, is your truth. It's your innate nature. It's the meaning and purpose of your life. So I help people cross that bridge, as I call it, from karma to Dharma. Now, one of the first things that I teach people is to understand their Dharma archetype. If you've ever grown up thinking, oh, do you know what? I don't feel like people understand me. I'm not sure who I am. I don't know what I'm supposed to be passionate about. I don't know what my purpose is. This is what I'm hearing from so many people. In fact, some of my clients are high achieving professionals. They've made it, they've got careers in leadership, they're managers, some of them are doctors, lawyers, accountants, and yet still they come to me and they say, I don't know my purpose. I don't have meaning in my life. And that's because they reach a certain stage where they've achieved everything materialistically. They've got the job title, they've got the fancy car, they've got the nice house, they've got the children, the dog maybe. But actually what they're searching for is so much deeper than that. And that's when we bring in spirituality with practicality. So one of the first things I do is help people to understand their archetype. Now, finding out my archetype has been an absolute game changer. And the participants of my Dharma Diploma course have also found that it's completely changed the way that they've shown up when they have really started to understand and connect with their archetype. So let's dive right in. Grab your notebook. You're going to want to write this down. So the first one I'm going to talk to you about is the merchant. Now, the merchant archetype is the most charismatic out of the bunch. Out of these five, it's the one that's lively, it's very charming. It's, that person, everybody's got that one person in their friend circle or their family that lights up the room. They always want to be seen and heard, and they're a performer. That's a merchant archetype. Now, when we talk about this, we're talking about the soul's true nature. Some people use that archetype to cover up deeper insecurities. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people who are that person, not someone who is charismatic in front of people and then really quiet behind closed doors. We're talking about someone who is that way all the time. No matter what they're going through, they're always laughing, always smiling. I have a friend actually, and he was diagnosed with cancer, and throughout his treatments he was so positive. He was so almost making humor out of it. He would laugh, when he lost his hair and he ended up going bald, and he would make jokes about it. And then even when he went into the hospital, he would just light up the place, and everybody knew he was coming, and he would flirt with the nurses, and that was his character, his personality. And that is a typical merchant. And the reason I started with merchant, not because they are better, there's actually no order to these at all. There's no feeling of superior or inferior. But the reason I started with this particular one is because right now the current world is a merchant world. So people who are merchants are going to go further in life. They're going to get more deals. They're going to get more jobs. They're going to make more money. And that's just the reality of it, because they are people that will stand out. So if you are up against someone who's a merchant, and if you're quiet and shy by nature, but you may have more qualifications, and then someone else goes in and is very charming, they are more likely to get the job. Unfortunately, that's the world we're living in, and that's across all industries. It's a merchant world. If you look at most of the leaders, the prime ministers, the presidents, majority of them have the merchant archetype. So that's why I started with that one. Now, each one of these archetypes, it's very important to note that there is a evolved version of them when they're in their higher self, and there's also a shadow version of them when they're in their lower self. So if you've seen my videos, you'll know that I always talk about higher self and lower self. And just like with everything, there's two sides. There's a dark side and there's a light side. So a merchant in their light side, in their higher self, will be very charming, charismatic, as we've said, perhaps funny. They don't have to be funny, but they can be. Also quite entrepreneurial. They take opportunities, so they're an opportunist. They, do things. They want to make other people happy. They, like, if you think about car salesmen, if you think about people that are selling anything actually, they are merchants. However, if they're in their shadow self, they are more likely to be lost. They're more likely to have lots of ideas but not actually follow anything through. They might start something and then stop it partway through. They might sign up for courses and then not continue them. And that's because the shadow part of the merchant is that they don't have clear direction. Okay, moving on. Educator. This is my favorite one out of all of the archetypes, and probably because I am one. I'm an educator, and what that means is somebody that likes to impart knowledge. So not necessarily a teacher, but it can be a teacher, but someone who just enjoys sharing. So have you got somebody in your circle who you always go to for advice? That's just the steady go-to person that you know is going to give you sound advice. That person's likely to be an educator, even if they don't know it. And the thing is, just to reiterate, this is your soul's nature, okay? So unfortunately, a lot of people don't know their soul's nature, and therefore they're in jobs which actually contradict it. So if you're somebody that likes to give and you like to share your knowledge and your ideas, but you're not in a role that allows you to do that, there's going to be a sense of misalignment. Now, you may wish to watch my other video about this, because I talk a lot about what it feels like to be out of alignment. So the opposite of that is to be in alignment, to be able to be in congruence, if you like, with your Dharma, which is your soul's archetype, your true nature. So an educator is someone who wants to impart. They want to share their experience. They want to share their stories. Have you got somebody in your family, maybe an uncle or somebody, who just loves sharing stories? They just tell story after story, and there's not even many pauses in between. That is an educator, somebody that just wants to teach people. Now, the shadow side of that is that person can become quite arrogant, because educators are usually given a lot of respect, a lot of attention, a lot of time. But the shadow side of that is that they might become too demanding of that. They might seek attention more. They might feel like they deserve a lot more respect than they're getting. And they also, another part of that is that they might not always follow their own advice. So some educators don't always practice what they preach, and that can be quite dangerous. So as we said, there's always two sides to every archetype, and it really depends on whether or not the person taps into their higher self or their lower self. That's all it comes down to. Now, the third one is outsider. Now, this has quite a negative name, so I really want you to have an open mind about this. An outsider is someone who feels that they don't quite fit in. They feel like they're on the outside looking in. They're an observer of life. They don't necessarily want to follow the norm. They want to do things their own way. So that's the higher self version. The shadow version is they become a rebel. Because they don't want to follow the norm, they don't like rules, they'll end up going down a path which is quite destructive. So do you remember those boys in school that were always, making fun of the teacher? They were throwing things across the room, they were standing on their chairs, they were being naughty. Those are the outsiders. They don't quite fit in, so they don't know what to do. They don't know how to be part of a community or a society or a group. So what they do is they end up forging their own path. So if they're tapped into their higher self, their own path could actually be really empowering because they could create something very innovative. But if they go down their lower self, their shadow version, then they'll end up becoming a rebel, maybe even a criminal, doing something which is morally wrong because they're being driven by their lower self and their outsider, which makes them feel that they're not part. So they think, well, nobody cares about me anyway, no matter what I do, it's not enough. Nobody sees me, nobody hears me, so I might as well go down my own path. So outsider is probably the most misunderstood one. And when I do my courses, it takes the longest time to explain. I go into a lot of detail with participants. And those people that recognize themselves to be outsiders, it can be quite a hard pill for them to swallow because for years they haven't understood why they are the way they are, and then suddenly they're given this knowledge and it gets kind of eye-opening for them. Right, that brings me on to the fourth one. Now this is the one that makes up the majority of the population. So most people in the world are this archetype, and that is labourer. Labourer is someone who works hard. They keep their head down, they do an honest day's work, they pay their taxes, and all they want is a simple life. That's it. They're only working for the stability of their family and perhaps their extended relatives, and that's it. They're just wanting to get by and to work hard. Now, the reason I say it's the majority of the population is because most people find themselves as labourers who just want to do well in life, get by, have a holiday a year, like it's just the kind of average norm. Now, it doesn't mean that it's boring or mundane. We need labourers, we need people to work, and we need that people to, give us that stability. Majority of men are labourers, and that's simply because men by nature are the breadwinners, if you like, of society traditionally. So that's why if a labourer is in their higher self, there'll be someone that's very grounded, they're very hardworking, they just have a really good work ethic. However, if they're in their lower self, what they might do is they might overwork, they might hustle, they might get into burnout because working is so easy for them, like it comes so naturally to them. They want to work. So if somebody's in their shadow self, lower mind, they might overwork. That's the only worry with the labourer. Finally, we're on to the warrior. Now, remember, there's no order to this. I've just done it in a, intuitive order. But the warrior is perhaps the one who is the strongest of the pack. Like it's the person who really believes that they're here for a great cause. They want to support something that's meaningful. So a warrior has a lot of drive, a lot of energy, a lot of strength. And if they're in their higher self, they will represent something that's bigger than them. So you'll see a lot of people campaigning for climate change, people working in social services, domestic abuse, those kind of areas. They're warriors because they want to do something that has meaningful impact. There's a ripple effect. So a warrior will not want to work with a company that doesn't align with its values. So let's say a company is polluting the environment, a warrior by nature will not want to. They feel very uncomfortable, very misaligned working for them. No matter how much they need the money, they will try to find a job that's very aligned. Now, the downside of a warrior, the shadow self, if you like, is argumentative. So warriors are very fiery, they're very feisty. And if they don't have a channel to be able to, allow themselves to support a cause, that's when they become really quite self-destructive, but also destructive for others around them. So being around a warrior is a very heavy energy. It's very much like this person always wants to pick a fight. No matter what you do around them, they'll always find something to argue about or pick on. And the reason being because they've got all this built up energy in them that's not being channeled in the right way. But if they are in their higher self, they could actually make amazing things happen. They could change the law, they could do all kinds of powerful things. A lot of people who work in law are actually warriors by nature. So now we're just going to do a quick recap of those 5 archetypes. I hope that you've made notes, but you may wish to go back and watch this again. This knowledge is very deep, and it's not about just theoretically understanding it, but it's about embodying it. So you may wish to go back and watch it again. So we started with the merchant. So I explained that that's a very charismatic, charming, very bold personality, someone who likes to be a performer. Then we moved on to the educator, someone who wants to impart knowledge in order to enlighten other people. Then the outsider, the person who is able to see things from a different perspective. They don't just follow the norm. They are able to sort of see beyond. And the good thing about an outsider is they can take on any of the other roles. They can decide that they want to be a merchant one day. They can be a warrior the next day. The outsider is the most versatile of the roles. And then the labourer, the person who's very hardworking. They keep their head down. They do what they're meant to do. They don't cause trouble. They just want to work and get paid and just have a stable, simple life. When I say simple, I don't mean simple in terms of materialistically. I mean stable, really, grounded, very sound person. A labourer is someone that you can really rely on. And then finally, warrior, someone who wants to fight, someone who's got all this energy in them. They want to use it. They want to do something meaningful. They want to represent a cause. But we also said that each one of these archetypes has a shadow side. And if they are not careful, they will go away from their actual calling. So when we say we want to be in alignment with our Dharma, what we're really saying is that we want to be in alignment with our true nature. So I thought it might be interesting now for me to share with you my archetypes, just so that you can start to think about yours. So each one of us has a primary archetype, which is our first one, and a secondary, which is our second one. Now the reason we have 2 is because we have one primary one that is dominant. So that's our true nature. That's like who we are all the time. And then we have a secondary one which comes and goes. You might find that each one of the things that I described you relate to, in which case you might be an outsider. If you related to all of them, it's likely you're probably going to be an outsider. Otherwise, you would really feel a strong pull towards one more than the other. So in my case, it took me a while to figure this out, but my primary archetype is educator. And that's simply because I love sharing. I love talking. I love teaching. When I was a child, people asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I always replied, I want to be a teacher. So that was, your younger self will know. Whatever it was that you said, many people say, I want to be a pilot, I want to be this, I want to be that. And it's because they know where their true nature will be best applied. But here's the truth. When you're in alignment with your true nature, it actually doesn't matter what job you do, because the job itself is just a medium through which you are expressing your nature. The main thing is that you are connected to your nature. So for example, I'm an educator, therefore I've had a very vast career teaching dance, teaching yoga, doing energy healing on people and also teaching it. Now I teach Dharma and coaching. I go into organizations, I speak, I share my ideas, I write books. So that's how I apply my educator nature. So it doesn't matter what job you do, it's just that everything you're doing, you have to be connected with who you really are. And my secondary nature, actually, I thought you'd find this interesting, but I actually thought I was a merchant for a long time. Like I went for many, many months thinking I'm a merchant and that's who I am. I'm charismatic because I am actually quite witty. I like using humor when I teach. And so I had convinced myself that I was a secondary merchant until one day I was watching something, a documentary in fact, and I realized that actually I'm not. And that's why I thought this would be interesting for you to hear, because sometimes what we do is we forget. Our soul forgets who we are, and because we want to fit in, we mask, we pretend. So what I realized I was doing was I was pretending to be a merchant so that I would fit in. But actually my secondary archetype is in fact an outsider. And the reason that I realized this is because I was watching a documentary and they were talking about children who felt left out, like they feel like they're not part of the group. They don't feel like they have a set friendship group. And that was me as a child. I never knew who I was going to play with that day. The girls that I played with the day before would act like they didn't even know me the next day. So I felt like I was being pulled and pushed in different directions, to the point where I started going to the school library on my own in break times, just because I didn't want the humiliation of being there and not having friends. So I soon started to realize that I couldn't rely on people. People were flaky. That was the belief that I created. And I became really self-immersed and I started writing. And writing soon became my solace, and then later dancing. And so what I came to realize is actually I was always a secondary outsider. I wouldn't say I was a primary outsider, because I was actually able to integrate into society. People that are a primary outsider wouldn't even be able to have any friends, but I was able to. I just wasn't able to keep them, and they pushed me away for some reason, and I'd never understand why. And I'd always think to myself, what did I do wrong? Why did those girls, they don't want to talk to me, or they didn't invite me to the birthday party? And it's because I was a secondary outsider, which meant that I was not ever meant to be a follower. I was born to be a leader, and that explains why I set up my own business from such a young age, and now why I coach leaders and entrepreneurs. So when I realized that I was a secondary outsider, I was pretending to be a merchant. So that doesn't mean that I can't be funny and charismatic. I can, and I still will be, and I am. I'm witty and everything. But that's not really my secondary. So my primary is educator, because I want to teach and share. My secondary is that I feel like I do things in an innovative way. I'm able to see beyond, and I don't follow the norm. And that's why I created very unique frameworks. Like I have my own service called Reiki Ritual. I could have just learned Reiki and just done the traditional Reiki, but I created my own type of treatment, and I even trademarked the name. I created my own program called Dharma Diploma. So everything I've done, I've always created. I haven't just learned something from someone and taught it. That's what a laborer would do. They would go on a course, they would follow instructions, and they would just relay it. But I actually created my own things, so that's why I know now that I'm an outsider. But as I say, it took me a long time to come to that realization. I do have a quiz available, so if you would like it, please comment below and I will send you it. However, it's not always accurate. It is a case of going inwards, and it's about introspection. Really ponder on who you were before life started changing you? So who were you before you started hearing limiting beliefs from your parents and your siblings and your teachers? Who were you before life tried to change you? You know, a lot of people that come to me, they say, as a child, I was always funny. I was the clown in my class. I was the performer. But then my teachers told me off and my parents told me that that wasn't appropriate. So I suppressed it. And now I'm very serious by nature. So this is a typical example of someone who was born a merchant. Their soul is a merchant, but society suppressed them. And now they're feeling that discomfort, that restlessness. And that's a sign from your higher self saying, hey, guess what? You're meant to be funny. You're meant to be a performer. Don't suppress it anymore. And that's why when we peel back the layers of karma, that's when we tap into Dharma. Dharma is simply our essence. It's our seed. It's our innate nature. It's the version of us that we're meant to be before society impacted us, you know, with all its conditioning and programming. So I hope that this video has helped. Please comment below. Let me know your feedback, your realizations, your thoughts. And if you think you know what archetype you are, please let me know. I am going to continue creating videos like this. So if there's anything you would like to know more about, please let me know. I talk about karma, dharma, masculine energy, feminine energy, yoga, well-being, mindfulness, meditation. There are so many topics that I enjoy talking about. So let me know what you're interested in and I'll make my next videos accordingly. Also, if you know anyone else that's going through any kind of situation right now and they need support, please send them this video. It might just change the way that they think about things and it might just really help them. So thank you in advance for sharing. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Namaste.